Ladies.
I'm pleased to welcome you all to this webinar on preventing and responding to illicit intercountry adoption practices. This is the first of two that are being organized by Child Identity Protection with Intercountry Adoptees Voices, the Institute for Inspiring Children's Futures at the University of Strathclyde, and UNICEF. And with the help of our excellent panelists, we will be reviewing how and why states have reacted or not reacted to historical illicit practices in intercountry adoption, which for our purposes are essentially those that took place before the entry into force of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Hague Convention. While there's been increasing ad hoc efforts to respond to the violations uncovered, opportunities clearly exist to improve alignment with international standards and implementation of the substantive outcomes they provide for. So that we're on the same page, I just want to remind you that that when we talk about illicit practices, we are covering not only illegal acts, in other words, those that are formally prohibited by the law, but also those that contravene ethical standards and human rights in general. Just to give a little context to our discussions, let me address very briefly two frequent claims that past irregularities in intercountry adoption could not have been countered at the time. The first such claim is that the problems were not known. This is, of course, a myth. From the very start, or almost from the very start, there were concerns being expressed. And for example, one of the major problems that existed in the 70s, the evacuation of children from Vietnam under the baby lift program in 1975 provoked tremendous uproar in relation to the best interests of the child not being respected in that operation, with reports that there were lost or inaccurate records that compromised the viability of the adoptions that were envisaged. The very fact that public debate took place on that issue is an indication of the fact that the authorities were very aware of the problems being experienced. And of course, during the 1970s, there were ever increasing allegations of malpractice. And as early as 1980, a Council of Europe document noted that over the past decade, in other words, the 1970s, pressure by numerous European couples wishing to adopt has reduced the attention that is paid to the child's interests. And of course, recent national investigations have shown that there are that the authorities of several receiving countries were made aware of systemic and grave malpractice via missives from their diplomatic representations in countries of origins. And let's not forget either that the growing concerns about intercountry adoption influenced the drafting of the Convention on the Rights of the Child in the 1980s. Government delegates abandoned the original proposed provision on adoption, which would have simply obligated states to facilitate adoption, in favor of one emphasizing necessary safeguards to be respected, especially as regards intercountry adoption. In other words, essentially a complete turnaround in attitude because of the problems that had been documented. It was also a recognition of the escalating abuses which were laid out forcefully in Hans van Loon's report to the Hague Convention, to the Hague Conference, I'm sorry, that generated the decision in 1987 to draw up the Hague Convention. And therefore, once again, governments were fully aware of all the problems at that time. The second claim is that there was anyway no legal basis on which to intervene. And of course, it's true that specific international standards were lacking prior to the 1990s. But it's equally true that acts such as abduction, falsification of documents, and bribery, which we know are very present in inter-country adoptions, were already prohibited by law, and with a little political will could surely have been weaponized in many cases. And at the present time, invoking the statute of limitations, which in some instances would have required an adoptee in reality to file a complaint before reaching the age of a majority already, might not be deemed an appropriate response. So, in launching this webinar, I would warmly invite participants to submit questions to speakers via the Q&A button, which I believe is up top, but I'm not quite sure on this system. Please make sure that your questions are directly connected to the issues they deal with so that they can be considered. I'll be asking Mia Dumbach to manage the Q&As, basically because I've never done it before and I don't intend starting at my age. And now I'm going to hand over to the speakers, whose bios you will find in the chat, I believe. They will each have a maximum of 10 minutes for their remarks. And it's with great pleasure that I invite Anne Skelton, immediate former chair of the CRC committee, to kick off the discussion, looking at how the CRC and its optional protocol on individual complaints can be used to respond to past illicit inter-country adoptions. Anne, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you to Chip for organizing today's event and for inviting me to speak. As Nigel has already set out, the framework of the Convention on the Rights of the Child itself does provide us with a strong starting point for how states can be guided and what their obligations are, and where they breach those obligations, how they might be found to be accountable for the child rights violations that may have taken place. But let's just take one step back and think about what are states' obligations, because I think that's an important thing for us to consider. You know, there is obviously, today we're partly talking about preventing inter-country adoptions going forward, but we also need to think about practices that have happened quite some time ago. And I will come back to the difficulties under law that this does sometimes pose for us. But let me begin by talking about the fact that that states have obligations, first of all, to criminalize and investigate any inter-country adoptions that are either illegal or, even if technically they were legal and you know that they occurred under a law that was sound, there may have been malpractices, hidden practices that that later are revealed to have caused rights violations. And where that happens, states have the obligation to investigate, to look into what happened. And these kinds of investigations have to be impartial, diligent, and effective. And even if there hasn't been a formal complaint by someone, in other words, it shouldn't have to wait until someone files a formal complaint saying this has to be investigated. The state should be proactive in, ensuring that any of the past practices were compliant with the law. But in any case, obviously, there is a need for the state, once they are aware that there has been any such malpractice or illegal practice, they have to then undertake thorough investigations. There need to be steps taken to ensure that complainants and witnesses and victims who have been affected by this are properly supported during any processes of investigation. And that these kinds of investigations are best done in consultation with the affected people. Even determining the processes can benefit from victim consultation or affected party consultation. It's also important that states should work together, because where we're talking about intercountry adoption, there will be 2 states at least. There could be more, in fact. And so it's really important for mutual assistance across the different states in order to provide information, receive information, and be able to uncover what has happened in the past. Now, the obligation to provide remedies for illegal or illicit intercountry adoptions, or intercountry adoptions that have caused rights violations, includes primarily the right to the truth. So this is very important, and in fact has come strongly into international human rights law through the law around enforced disappearances. But it has now also become a fairly standard thinking in terms of remedies for intercountry adoption as well. So obviously there needs to be, proper systems put in place in order to maximize the truth. And as we know nowadays, because DNA is so important, that would be an important part of establishing those kinds of systems, as well as ensuring proper access to identity documents, identification issues that always arise in these kinds of cases. Sometimes it might be necessary to annul adoptions that took place that were unlawful, although this wouldn't always be an appropriate remedy. And of course, there is a right to reparation. So in other words, there should be reparation from the states that were responsible for this, to the persons who were affected. Again, it's important to take the views of those who were affected in mind when states decide on what the reparations should be. So I've sketched the background, I think, of what the main features, I mean, there's more detail one could go into, but I think these are the main features. Where there has been mass mass violations of rights, then we need to think about more mechanisms that can reach a broader group of people, such as different kinds of truth mechanisms, different commissions of inquiry, that kind of thing. And we've seen, and I'm sure today we will hear about some of those kinds of practices. Moving on to the optional protocol on a communications procedure under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is a complaints procedure that individuals or groups of individuals whose rights have been violated can approach the Committee on the Rights of the Child. There are 2 different ways of doing this, and that is through individual cases that can be brought by a group or an individual, but it has to be actual people who are affected. Or there is also an inquiry procedure in which the committee can be informed by any source of rights violations. But in the case of these inquiries, they must be grave or systematic violations. And that's quite a high threshold in law to show that something was grave or systematic. But obviously, if it's affected a lot of people, then it will be likely to be systematic. And if it's a grave, very serious, the way that has affected people's rights, then it makes it grave. It doesn't have to be grave and systematic, only has to be grave or systematic. And there, the admissibility requirements, kind of getting it in through the door, is easier, I would say, than the processes under the individual communications procedure. So far, the Committee on the Rights of the Child has not received any inquiry requests relating to intercountry adoption at all. That means that there isn't any jurisprudence. In other words, we can't say what the committee's findings have been because we haven't had any such findings yet. I think those who might be considering using these channels have to think carefully about some of the limitations. One of the limitations is the time-sensitive nature of these things. As Nigel mentioned earlier, there are, things that happened a long time ago. There are often statutes of limitations in the states where these things occurred, which means that it's hard to bring cases many years afterwards. But with the optional protocol on a communications procedure, the problem may be that the rights violation can only really be brought against a state that has ratified the optional protocol. So first step is you have to check, did the state against whom you wish to bring the claim ratify the third optional protocol to the CRC? If that is the case, then the next step that one could move to is, when did the rights violation occur? And how does that relate to when the state ratified, probably when they ratified the convention is important, and also when they ratified this optional protocol. At first glance, it looks as though any violation that occurred before the date at which the state ratified the third optional protocol would not be justiciable. But this is not entirely so, because there is a whole body of jurisprudence that says that where the rights violation is continuing, this would still be justiciable under the optional protocol on a communications procedure. So in each and every case where such cases are being considered, these are the kinds of considerations that possible people wanting to bring such claims before the Committee on the Rights of the Child would have to consider. Is it a state that has ratified the third optional protocol? Is it a state, or when did the state ratify? And is it possible to argue that the rights violation is an ongoing rights violation? Jurisprudence from other committees indicate that it might be possible to bring cases many years afterwards, and perhaps we'll hear later about the Committee on Enforced Disappearances practice in this regard, which I think is an interesting example that we can follow. But I think even some of the other committees as well have dealt with claims arising before the date when their state ratified the relevant instrument, but where it was successfully argued that there was an ongoing rights violation. So Nigel, I think I will stop there. Of course, people can put questions and in the chat, and I will respond to any of those later.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Anne. Interesting to see, I think, this idea of an ongoing violation in relation to an illegal intercountry adoption. As we all say, adoption is not just an act; it's a lifelong issue, and therefore, probably there are good arguments to be made in favor of the idea that this is indeed an ongoing violation. And we're now going to hand over to Olivier de Fourville, precisely a member, indeed the vice chair of the Committee on Enforced Disappearances that Anne mentioned, and who I'm sure will enlighten us on how that committee and how the convention can help us in our work to counter illegal adoptions that took place even a long time ago. Olivier.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nigel. And thank you to Chip and to Maya for the invitation. I'm very honored to participate in this panel, and I'm very happy to follow after Anne, who has already said a lot of things, interesting things. So I will come back on some of those aspects and also maybe shed the lights on particular issues relating to enforced disappearances. But first, I wanted to start with maybe some clarifications on the procedures and on the specific bodies that are in the United Nations looking at this issue of inter-country adoptions, because I know it's very hard for people to understand how it works and what are those different bodies. So just want to specify that in the United Nations, you have those so-called treaty bodies, which are the committees that are put in place under the conventions that have been adopted by states and sometimes ratified by states. And so the Convention on the Right of the Child is one of the convention, and it is supervised, it is monitored by the Committee on the Rights of the Child. And the Convention on Enforced Disappearances is another of those conventions, and it is monitored by the Committee on Enforced Disappearance. Those committees are composed of independent experts, so we are elected by states, but we are completely independent from states and from other organizations. And we're also acting on a voluntary basis, so we're not paid by the United Nations. But aside from this treaty body system, you also have a system which is put in place under basically the UN Charter, the General Assembly, and a specific body which is called the Council, the Human Rights Council, and not the Human Rights Committee. And under the Human Rights Council, which is an interstate body, you also have special procedures, the so-called special procedures, special rapporteurs, working groups, independent experts. They're also independent experts, just like us, basically. But the difference is that they're not constrained by the limits of the ratification by states of the convention. So they basically can cover all member states of the United Nations. So it's very interesting to see those two systems as complementary system. And for us, on the issue of enforced disappearances, and I think also on the issue of inter-country adoptions, it's very interesting to see that those two systems can be used, because I think today we are here to speak about how to use those mechanisms, and you really have to see them in complementarity. So for instance, for enforced disappearances, you have the committee covering 78 countries, but you also have the working group on enforced disappearances covering all the other member states of the United Nations. And so sometimes also covering member states that have ratified the convention, but in a different manner. So we act in a very complementary way. For instance, we were speaking about this just before the seminar started in Korea. Currently, there is a technical visit of my colleague, Gabriela Citroni. She's there to visit Korea as a chair of the working group on enforced disappearances. This is a kind of ordinary visit. She's not investigating. She's more taking contacts with different parties that are working on enforced disappearances, including cases of inter-country adoptions or illegal adoptions. That's something we cannot do with the committee. Although Korea is a party to the convention, we don't do those technical visits. So we really act in complementarity. So that's the first thing I wanted to stress, that it's important to have the full picture in sight. I think you can see this complementarity also in a text which might be known by many of you, which is the joint declaration that was adopted in 2022 by the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and also several special procedures, including the Working Group on Enforced Disappearances. So we really work together. And what we try to do here is to put all the standards that are applicable in international law on international country adoptions, to put them together to see what is all the obligations that states have under the different conventions and the different standards. What are the rights that the victims have, and what are the avenues that can be also explored in terms of remedies by the victims. The second thing maybe I wanted to highlight is the connection between enforced disappearances and illegal adoptions, because sometimes I think it's quite difficult for people to get. I often get questions about this. What's the connection? Because when we speak about enforced disappearances, mostly people see what's happening currently in Ukraine, for instance, what took place in the 1970s, in the 1980s in Latin America, especially in Argentina, but they don't necessarily see the connection with adoptions. But if you think about, for instance, Argentina, you may know that part of the crimes against humanity, the strategy of enforced disappearances, part of it was illegal adoptions, in the sense that some women were detained in illegal centers of detentions when they were pregnant, and when they gave birth, the babies were taken from them. They were subsequently executed, and the babies were given to families which were close to the dictatorship under a falsified identity. And this kind of illegal adoptions took place in many other countries under mostly the same strategy, basically stealing children in the context of violence, political violence, and then giving them or selling them for adoptions with falsified identities, either on a domestic basis in the country and sometimes in other countries, including Western countries, for instance. So they use the channels of illegal adoptions in this context. And very often these practices continued even after the time of political violence. And that's the thing which is interesting, where you see where the practice of enforced disappearances crosses the practice of what is often seen as trafficking, is that it's the same channel, for instance, in Guatemala, that have been used in time of political violence and subsequently used in a trafficking context. In fact, it's the same person who acted, it's the same networks, the same channels that were used. But then, as they were not finding children in killing or in attacks against Maya villages in the context of the Maya genocide, they would steal children anywhere, from poor people, in maternity, and they use the same technique as we often see and the same patterns that we often see in many countries. Maybe the last point I just want to underline, because I think this was a point of a very important point of attention. Nigel, do I still have 2 minutes, or? It's okay? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. 2 minutes.
2 minutes, 2 minutes, that's fine. Okay. The last point is about, and I think Anne I've spoken already about this, is the issue of retroactivity of the law and also statute of limitation, because we understand this is an issue which is very often posed in many countries where victims are trying to get accountability for the crimes and for the practices of the past.
He's a little bit frozen, but he will come back, I think. I don't know why.
Yeah. Completely broken, I'm afraid. Well, I think that given the time, we'll have to move on straight away. With great regret to have lost Olivier in full swing, but thanks a lot to Olivier for your contribution there, and underlining the connection between enforced disappearances and intercountry adoption, which is not always well accepted everywhere, but nonetheless I think is very valid in many cases, and also for underlining the statute of limitations issue that Anne also mentioned. So I will now hand the floor to Lynelle Long. I must say that the whole questioning of intercountry adoption and its effects and problems has been so. The landscape has so changed ever since adoptees found a way of making their voices heard in the past 5 to 10 years, and Lynelle, as executive director of Intercountry Adoptees Voices, has been a very positive element in that evolution, and she's going to talk precisely about the initiatives that have been taken responding to past illicit intercountry adoptions. Lynelle, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Can you hear me? Great. Yeah. Good day to you all. Thank you, Mia, Nigel, and the CHIP team for the opportunity to speak to you today. I want to especially thank both Anne and Olivia for championing our fight with us adoptees in this webinar. It is very significant to us as victims to be validated and supported in such powerful ways. So thank you. I'm Lynelle Long, born in Vietnam, taken to Australia as a 5-month-old baby. I'm now in my early 50s, and I still don't have any adoption paperwork from my birth country, Vietnam, to this day. I've only ever had a passport with a name and a date. It's most likely falsified. I've spent over 45 years looking for the truth of who I am, hoping that my origins, that I can find them, but I still remain without any answers. I've spent years asking Vietnam to help me reissue me with a birth certificate in order to reclaim Vietnamese citizenship that should have been mine, but this has still not been possible. I need to find funds to pay for a lawyer in a country where I don't speak the language, and this gives you just one example of the many barriers that exist for me to even reclaim who I am in Vietnam. In Australia, I've actually taken certain legal action against my adoptive parents, and I have used my rights and annulled my adoption. I will speak briefly about the growing international responses to historic illicit and illegal intercountry adoptions, but more importantly, what meaningful responses actually need to be looked at beyond the investigation phase. Over the past decade, we've seen a major global shift. For many years, adoptees and first families have questioned our histories, and we've been dismissed as isolated cases until now. Increasingly, governments and institutions are now confronted with evidence of systemic problems. These included falsified identities, coercion of vulnerable mothers and families, child laundering, trafficking, financial incentives influencing adoption practices, failures to verify whether children are truly adoptable, and whether broader systemic failures exist in oversight and accountability. As a result, a growing number of countries, our adoptive countries especially, have launched investigations and reviews into historic practices. The Netherlands was the first in 2021. They conducted a major inquiry that ultimately has now led to the end of intercountry adoptions being phased out by 2030. The Flemish part of Belgium was next, and they've been particularly important because they've actually been the first country to actually do legal reforms, where they've opened pathways that allow accountability for illegal adoption practices. The legal prosecution of a Congolese trafficker occurred in February this year. She got jailed for 14 years after abducting children and placing them for adoption as orphans. France, Sweden and Switzerland have each conducted an independent investigation and produced reports. Switzerland and France in particular are notable because they've been the first countries in the world to fund adoptee-led search and reunion organisations to help adoptees in their searching. This was for Sri Lankan and Ethiopian adoptees respectively. Norway is about to publish their review and their report looking into past practices. And from a birth country perspective, Chile was way ahead of the times, and they investigated in 2019. But so far, sadly, they've failed to create any meaningful pathway for survivors and victims. In comparison, South Korea has now included intercountry adoption in their truth and reconciliation processes, thanks to the incredible work by adoptees like Peter and Bunyang, who will present to you next in more depth. South Korea continues today to examine the historical role of the state and private actors in intercountry adoption. In my own adoptive country, Australia, we're the first country outside Europe to have our government look at an investigation into historic intercountry adoptions. Sadly, they're only limiting it to South Korea, but we're hopeful that maybe it will open the way for others. Quebec is to be recognised for its proactiveness, as they have been the first country outside Europe to actually place a moratorium on all intercountry adoptions, new ones. And to my knowledge, this has been done without conducting a public investigation or initiated by adoptee advocacy. Quebec are currently reviewing their practices and policy, and they're engaging adoptees and stakeholders in that process. Denmark is the first adoptive country in the world to attempt to investigate and report on all the countries they've adopted from, all 70 of them. What is striking is that despite these different countries, languages, and time periods, there are remarkably similar patterns that we see. As Nigel said earlier, they're patterns that we've known about for a long time. We repeatedly see falsified paperwork, children declared abandoned without proper verification, coercion of mothers, financial pressures, poor oversight, and systems driven more by demand for children than for protection of families in children. But I think we are now reaching a critical point internationally where the question is no longer simply, did illicit practices occur? Increasingly, we know that there's evidence that they did. The much larger question now is, what happens after the investigations? Because investigations alone do not restore our identities. They do not reunite us to our families. They do not repair our lifelong trauma, and they do not automatically create accountability. So I would like to focus a remainder of my time on what meaningful responses actually need to look like in practice from a survivor-victim perspective. First, we need truth. Well, what does truth mean? Truth means independent investigations with real powers and transparency. It means unrestricted access to records and archives. It means preservation of documents rather than destruction or secrecy. It means states, institutions, and our adoptive parents openly acknowledge the harms rather than minimizing them as isolated historical mistakes. For adoptees and first families, truth is often the foundation for understanding who we are, what happened to us, and why. Secondly, we need identity restoration. For many adoptees like me, we live with falsified, incomplete, or unknown identities. Some of us have incorrect birth dates, false abandonment stories, altered names, missing family histories, severed citizenship and legal ties to our countries and families of origin. Identity restoration must therefore include access to original records, DNA testing, family tracing, restoration of original names where we want it, dual citizenship rights in both adoptive and birth countries, legal pathways to reverse illegal adoptions where the impacted people desire, and recognition that identity is a lifelong human right. Thirdly, we need long-term support. Too often, intercountry adoption systems were designed around the placement of us, assuming that we remain children forever, with very little responsibility taken for our lifelong and multi-generational outcomes. But adoptees and first families, we often continue living with grief, trauma, separation, racial isolation, mental health challenges, reunion complexities, legal insecurity, and financial burden across our entire lives. This means support must be lifelong, trauma-informed, culturally competent, equitable, free, and accessible. And it needs to include mental health support, search and reunion assistance, translation services, legal support, return to country assistance, peer support, and support for first families, not just for adoptees. And lastly, we need accountability. Accountability cannot simply mean symbolic apologies. It must include legal and structural reform. Countries need legislation to criminalise illicit intercountry adoption practices. We need to strengthen safeguards. We need to create mechanisms to prosecute trafficking, for document fraud, for coercion and corruption where they occur. We also need systems that prevent recurrence. That means better oversight, independent monitoring, ethical accreditation system, preservation of records, and meaningful post-adoption accountability across the lifespan. And importantly, we need recognition that states, institutions, and adoptive parents may carry responsibility for the harms caused under past systems. That includes discussions around reparative justice and compensation. Because many adoptees and families of origin, we've personally borne enormous financial costs trying to recover our truth, identities that should never have been taken from us in the first place. We pay for DNA testing, translation, legal representation, travel, therapy, family tracing, citizenship restoration, all at our own expense. Compensation is not about assigning a monetary value to our human suffering. It's about acknowledging responsibility and ensuring that we are not left alone to carry the lifelong consequences of systemic failures. Finally, all of these responses must centre the lived experiences of us adoptees and our first families. Too often, our responses are developed about us without directly involving us. The lived experience is not supplementary expertise, it's essential. Many of the investigations and reforms we are now seeing internationally, they exist because we adoptees and first families have spent decades documenting harms, educating governments, organising globally, and demanding accountability. Without our leadership and advocacy, many of these issues would likely remain hidden. So as international conversations continue to evolve, I believe the challenge before us is not simply how to investigate the past, it's how to respond ethically and responsibly to the people who continue to live with the consequences today. And that response requires more than acknowledgement alone. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks again to Chip for making this webinar possible.
Many thanks to you, Lynelle. Not much to add to that, I'm afraid, because I think you've said it all, and in the usual eloquent style. The idea of the need for accountability now for adoptees who have suffered abusive adoptions in the past are is clearly fundamental to what we're talking about. So now I'm pleased to give the floor to Bunyong Han and Peter Muller to give us an idea of what is happening in Korea, which has been a very let me say, interesting country in terms of intercountry adoption. And I hope they can give us an idea of what the well, I know they will give us an idea of the work of the Korean Truth Commission. Several speakers have mentioned the importance of truth, and here we have the Korean Truth Commission, which is and how adoptees have facilitated the work of the Commission. Over to you, Bunyong and Peter.
Thank you, Nigel, and to Mia and to everybody at CHIP for inviting us to this very meaningful event today. My name is Bunyong Han, and I'm with the Danish Korean Rights Group. We have our fellow groups also. This is not only a two-person job. I'll give a brief summary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report that came out last year, and then Peter continues with the still remaining challenges and obstacles. But first, let's just jump into it. I'll share some of the key conclusions here from what we typically call the TRC2. The report did find that Well, most significantly, they concluded that the adoptions were in violation of both Korea's own constitution and international conventions, such as, for example, the UNCRC. The commission, they furthermore concluded that it was the state who fostered adoption promotion, and that the legislative, executive, and judicial branches all pursued such large-scale adoptions while simultaneously neglecting their oversight responsibilities and the problems arising from this neglect. There's also really harsh critique of the Korean government. One example is the government in the 1980s who, and I quote, turned a blind eye to adoption agencies' practice of reinvesting finances, the system of forced compulsory donations, as they effectively became a whole industry. So adoptees, they were sent abroad unlawfully, and this was done by facilitating how their identities and family information were erased, falsified, and or neglected with neglected records. So I have included some of the details of how the commission found that adoptees' rights were violated. And just to reiterate that the commission, Korea's own commission, actually concludes that it's a violation of the constitution. We found it very significant and obviously had very big hopes to what would come after. So based on these conclusions, the commission came out and they made the following recommendations. And importantly, to keep in mind, it's a commission, but the relevant state parties, they are by law obligated to respect these decisions and recommendations. So in addition to recommending a formal apology and the ratification of the Hague Convention, the Commission also addressed the need to continue investigation. And so more specifically, they actually recommended the Ministry of Health and Welfare and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to establish a body to examine and to provide remedies in cases such as, for example, duplicated or falsified identities. The recommendation for the Ministry of Interior is to correct falsified public records. And although there's no details of what these remedies are, the Commission is very clear that adoptees need to have access to such remedies. And finally, on the issue of right to identity, the Commission recommended that the Ministry of Health and Welfare, they collect and preserve not only documents from the adoption agencies, as have been widely discussed, but they must collect and preserve from all institutions, facilities, centers where the child has been. And they also made recommendations to the adoption agencies, which they mandate them to take active measures also to redress the harms that they have caused. And they also recommend, obviously, that the adoption agencies, they should cooperate fully to move the records to the relevant authorities in their entirety. So what has then happened after these conclusions? It's about a year ago, and the recommendations almost work as a checklist. Other than the president's apology and the Hague ratification, we see that in 25, they propose a new basic plan for child policy, and they include in that they plan to end intercountry adoption within 5 years. So if we move on to this year, we see more efforts, and we especially among that TRC3, which I think Peter will talk a little bit more about, which will allow more victims to pursue the truth. We see two very important, very significant law proposals for adoptees. One is on the issue of on this information disclosure. So it is now going to be reversed, so to say that in the future, when adoptees make a request for their parents' information, unless the parents actively say no to this, then the adoptee will be able to get their parents' information. That, of course, with that, we hope that we will avoid gray zone cases, such as when the parents is not reachable or is not able to give consent, but also instances where authorities make arbitrary decisions and do not disclose information. There's the other very significant proposal, which is on the issue of compensation. The proposed law says that everybody who has been a victim to state violence, and that is then described as those with a conclusion from the TRC. So it's based on the TRC's work. Those with a conclusion from the TRC will be eligible to seek compensation. So, yes. Well, we welcome this, but there is still much to be done. So I think Peter will talk a little bit more about the challenges and the barriers that remain.
So I would actually continue with what Punyang has made here with the president. In March this year, he announced that perpetrators of human rights, state violence, must be hunted down like Nazi criminals, promising swift justice and punishment. So we enter the TSC with this announcement from the president of South Korea. The 3rd of December 2024, Korea experienced a military attempt of a military coup d'etat to bring back old times authoritarian rule. That also brought a pause to all the cases in the TSC. So we went out and asked for a third commission to be established with a wider mandate, a mandate to seize documents if necessary, a mandate to to search private buildings for documents, evidence. Also a possibility to ask the police and prosecutor's office to investigate if they have a suspicion of crimes in connection with human rights violations. Until now, we have submitted collectively 150,000 pages of evidence and documentation to the TSC. We are in the TSC too. We have lifted the burden of proof when it comes to the state responsibility. We have lifted the burden of proof in the batches of cases that have been through the TSC2 with a decision. And we have put all the evidence in to lift the burden of proof in each of the individual cases, and also to lift the burden of proof when it comes to more issues when it comes to the responsibility of the state. To date, we have submitted 701 individual adoption cases. And in addition to this, we have brought requests to investigate more systemic issues in connection with the role of the state and private state authorized actors. It is about ethnic cleansing of mixed-race children, the systemic use of medical induced premature birth, adoptees' medical conditions, metal objects found in head and body. That could also be hand grenades, shrapnel, bullet wounds, and so on. The use of adoptees for medical experiments. The treatment of Korean women. Forced adoptions of children from Korean concentration camps. Alleged adoption agencies' mass graves involving approximately 20,000 children. And many more issues. Yeah, these are the challenges we have right now, and I know the time is running. But this is the challenges we are facing right now with the police reports we have made. 131 police reports to the Korean police. It should be easy. The problem right now is that adoptees are without any legal protection. We're not protected in any way under the law, even though the Korean Constitution, Article 6, it's the states the monist principle that all international treaties and conventions, they are considered domestic law in Korea. And we also have a lot of domestic laws in Korea, administrative laws, criminal laws, that actually should address the problems, but nothing has been done yet. The Ministry of Health and Welfare, they have this opinion that only the Special Adoption Act can rule when it comes to inter-country adoptions. They say that the adoption law has legal supremacy over all laws, including the Constitution, for some reason. And if the adoption law, if it doesn't mention a problem, adoptees can't invoke other laws or regulations in Korea. That means that all fair procedures in administration, that means that you can get a decision as an adoptee in Korea without getting the decision in writing or even any reference to laws in Korea under which the decision has been made. We have a problem with privacy versus secrecy. Right now, they invoke privacy to deny adoptees access to information. And the problem is in the cases where we have crimes, people who have been adopted, lie dead and sent out for adoption, children where you have falsified documents, we can't. They say it's privacy. So our question is, whose privacy are they protecting? Privacy is right now used to shield and hide crimes in Korea right now. That is the frustrating reality we are facing right now. Yeah, I'm told that the time is running out. We have also made a police report to Denmark, request for criminal investigation into adoption agencies and public officials and intermediaries involved in enforced disappearance of children sent from Korean concentration camps like Brothers Home, Himangwon, and Cheongsangwon. The Danish government has decided that they will not make a governmental investigation because it would require too much time and too much resources. And they also emphasize that the cases of enforced disappearances cannot be investigated because of statutes of limitation. These are the points that we're demanding, that human rights violations and crimes must be brought to an end. Children adopted or lied dead. These crimes, they need to stop. Adoptees must have the right to access to information concerning their true origin. Adoptees must be treated equally by governments and public authorities without being stranded in these administrative deserted islands, excluded from any protection under law. Adoptees must have the right to recover their true identities without secrecy and redactions. The biological families of adoptees must be recognized as victims and must have the same rights to the truth and to reparation. Police, prosecutors, and public authorities must investigate, prosecute, and ensure that the actors and perpetrators and accomplices that they are held accountable for the human rights violations and the crimes they have committed. So so this was my quick rundown. So apologize for going over time.
Not so quick, Peter, not so quick, but very, very obviously very, very interesting and a lot therein. When you were talking, I was reminded of the reaction of the Romanian delegate to the Hague Conference when the Hague Convention was being developed, and she stated very clearly that the thousands of children who had been adopted out of Romania in the first years after, on the first 18 months after the downfall of Ceausescu, she termed that as a national tragedy. And it's always made me wonder why there are not more so-called countries of origin that are launching investigations into that period and looking at how reparation can be made to the children that they allowed, at the instigation of the receiving countries, that they allowed to leave their country under conditions that were frankly intolerable. I want to just say, before passing the floor to Joël, apologies to Olivier that we had to cut him off because he cut himself off, or someone did. But maybe there will be a question or two for him that he can respond to. Our final speaker today is Joël Schickel-Kung, who is head of the private international law branch at the or unit at the Swiss Federal Ministry of Justice, and therefore the central authority of Switzerland on intercountry adoption and other matters. And she will take us through some of the efforts of her ministry in this sphere, including its collaboration with the adoptee-led NGO Back to the Roots, I hope. Thank you, Joël. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me and for all the presentations so far. Hopefully this will be a nice complement to end and launch us into the questions. So I will attempt to share my screen and my presentation. Let me know if it's working well. All good?
All good.
Then I'll start. So Switzerland, what happens? How do you react as a government when past scandals you were vaguely aware of, but were way before your time, resurface? So the story started in 2017. There was a TV reportage in the Netherlands following a adult adoptee from Sri Lanka who was going back to Sri Lanka searching for her roots. And this reportage and the issues there were picked up by the Swiss media. It was quite clear that from the reportage and from all of that already in the 80s, and it has been said before, there was wide media coverage and questions from politicians about what was already known then as scandals around intercountry adoption, reports of baby farms, acting mothers, and all of that. And so 30 years later, or even more, it resurfaces. And of course, the question is, well, how was that possible? What did the authorities know? What was done? Why was nothing done? Where are we today? This media attention then got picked up by politicians who mandated us formally in 2018 to present a report that was seeking to cover a wide range of issues around that. So historical analysis, but also critical analysis of the current system and what is done to support adoptees for their search of origins. This 2.5 years later, we published the report based on that mandate. There was an official statement and the launch of further steps. And I will quickly take you through those three aspects that I've just mentioned. So the historical research is the basis of everything. You need strong facts. The first thing we did was we mandated a university to do a historical report. It was then based on Sri Lanka. That was the start of it all. That was published in January 2020. What was important is from the start, we had an advisory group to help with the report, and that included representatives from the organization Back to Roots, that was really created around that time as well. Then when we had the first report, it was clear that this was not just Sri Lanka. So then we mandated an additional report that looked at 10 additional countries of origins. It was published November 23, and then there were other research that was done on different levels, and this one in particular around India is quite interesting, and the website is really informative. Based on all these findings, the Swiss government acknowledged past wrongdoings of the Swiss authorities and expressed its regrets towards the adoptees and their families. First in the Sri Lanka specific context, but then it was reiterated generally in December 2023. The second area of work was a critical analysis of the current system. There were some first elements in our original report, then there was an experts group that was set up, which republished its final report in January 25, saying there are two big options. Either we stop it all or we have to do a major reform. Status quo is not an option. There was a decision in principle of the Swiss government to prefer the scenario of stopping, of phasing out for various reasons. This was announced and created strong opposition from Parliament and also in the general public. So right now, at this stage, we are still working on the legislative project that will be submitted in December 26 for public consultation, where we will have the two options, a stop or a reform. And also it will include proposals to strengthen the support to the search of origins, which is the third bit of the original report. In Switzerland, even before all of that started, we have a system with designated information and counseling services specialized for search for origins for adopted people that support search of origin procedures, the search of documents and of persons in Switzerland and abroad. So that already existed, but we saw that when it comes to international cases and specifically when irregularities happen, it is much more complicated and the system is not at all perfect. So there were two things that were done. First, a protocol of agreement to work on those cases with the Central Authority of Sri Lanka, and this pilot project that has been alluded to with Back to Roots, with this NGO, where during 4 years they got government financing to do this pilot project of really doing in-depth support for the adoptees, having also a team in Sri Lanka that was doing searches and helping with reunions. And all of that feeds in the global discussion and ongoing reform of our system to be able to better help with search of origins. The key lessons to me of what is needed as a state to be able to face the past. First of all, media attention is always good. You need a story, a good story that will resonate with public opinion. And in the long run, you also really need investigative journalists that are keen to dig deeper. And we had the luck to have that in Switzerland. You need political will and openness. Often, and that's sad, that will take a real scandal, something that will shake you. That's what we've seen. But then you also need someone to who's actually ready to take up that cause. In Switzerland, we had active interest and involvement from some deputies in our national parliament, but also from the executive branch where I work, really readiness, openness to launch into that process fully and to support it. You need facts, evidence, as Linnell said, because you need to convince the politicians that this is not just a media story, but it is a real story. And even though we have so much evidence already and patterns all over, they will want evidence in your own state and to be sure, well, it's not just the others, it's us as well. And finally, and most importantly as well, you need a voice. You need people like Linnell or Sarah in Aachen in Switzerland. And when it's the country of origins, hopefully voices for the first families as well. Advocacy, lobbying, that starts with groups like Back to Roots in Switzerland. All of these are, of course, linked. It's a circle of champions, as was said, for the cause that all do their part and hope that together it will achieve the results. And if you're lucky, maybe you won't need all of those and one of these will suffice, but well, that's what it took in Switzerland. And then as a government, you need to then set up a process that will involve independent fact-finding. You need to be sure that the quality is there. That means it takes time, it takes resources. You need to look at individual cases, but you also need to look at general patterns. You need to look at reforming your current system if that's needed, if you're still into inter-country adoption. Make sure you're learning from the past and that you ensure this will never happen again. Some kind of official statement. Of course, the highest form would be a formal apology. In Switzerland, we had official regrets. There may be other ways and other things that have been done in the past. Remedies, Linnell said very eloquently, everything there is to be about that, from truth finding, financial compensation, criminal prosecution, any other aspect related to the restoration of identity. And last but not least, for all of this, you need to involve and to cooperate with the adoptees, which was more for us since that's the side we're on, and listen to their needs and integrate them in the whole thought process. And two last thoughts. It's a long process, and it's a process that evolves. It evolves together with public perception, with political perception, will support. It's going to be a bumpy road, and we're still in the middle of it, and it's going to take us still a long time to reach what we want to do. And I know that's frustrating, but at least it's moving. So that's a plus. And it was said as well, I mean, Switzerland, for example, we only have the story. We can only get so far if in a situation that involves two countries, we don't have on the other side a similar initiative and someone to work with and to do this together. It will be impossible to achieve what we need, and also cooperation between receiving countries. So thank you very much for your attention.
Sorry. Thanks so much, Joelle, for the, let's say, the governmental perspective, but also a very, let's say, well-meaning governmental perspective. We know that in all human rights situations, which includes the human rights of children, of course, that we're on an ongoing road that will probably, well, that will never end, and that sometimes we take a couple of steps forward and then one, or even unfortunately 2 or 3 backwards, but we have to build on the on what we managed to achieve as we go along. Thanks so much for giving that perspective. I'm now going to hand over to participants if they wish to pose questions in the question and answer section, which is below and not above, as I mistakenly said at the start. Mia, are you ready to? You are. Good. Thank you.
Thanks. So there are a few questions that we can see in the question and answers. I think, Anne, if you could answer the first question about the difference between the Hague Convention and the CRC Convention. And actually, Nigel, there's a question for you. I think that you're the best place to answer this one. What's your view?
I'm supposed to be off duty today.
I know, but you can answer it anyway. What's your view of where adoptions should be in terms of the continuum of care? It's more about the end part. Should it be something that's considered before residential care or after residential care? And that was a question that someone asked. Why was it excluded from the UN guidelines, from the UN guidelines on alternative care of children?
That's the question for me or for Anne?
Yes, that's for you. Anne
okay.
has hers. And also, this is a question for everyone. Should inter-country adoptions be abolished? That's a controversial one, but let's answer it. So Anne, over to you. Oh, but prior to that, can we let Olivier finish what he was saying? Because Olivier, the internet cut out, but hopefully it's working now. So if we have those last, I think we missed out on the last 2 minutes of what you wanted to say.
Good idea. Good idea.
So over to you, Olivier.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you. It seems that the network is not very good around here, so I have interruptions unstable. I think the two things I wanted to say is first about statute of limitations and non-retroactivity of criminal law. It's very clear that illegal adoptions are continuous acts, continuous crimes. And so they're not affected by statute of limitation and non-retroactivity. I mean, let's be clear. It's true for if you say it's an enforced disappearances, but it's also true if you use other crimes in domestic law. It's a continuous crime, so basically the statute of limitation only starts to run when the crime ceases, which means when the true identity of the person who's been abducted or has been illegally adopted with falsified identity is recovered officially, so under a trial or another official procedure. So that's first. The second thing I wanted to say, so the second minute is it's very important for the different groups, not only of adoptees but also of biological family, to use our procedures. So that was part, I think, of the topic of the webinar, how to use our procedures. This has been done already. The Committee on Enforced Disappearances is already, in the context of its reporting procedure, adopted more than 15 concluding observations in conclusion of the dialogues with states parties, including recommendations on issues of illegal adoptions, including international illegal adoptions. But there are also other procedures that can be used. Recently, the procedure before the Working Group on Enforced Disappearances of allegation letter has been used for Korea. A very detailed allegation letter has been sent to Korea, which triggered a very detailed response also from the state party. Of course, inquiries and visits also available. Urgent actions would be an interesting path to explore, I think, also. And that's something maybe we can discuss at any other points. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Olivier. Over to you, Anne.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think the question asked, first of all, why has the Committee on the Rights of the Child over many years asked states to ratify the Hague Convention on Intercountry Adoptions, and what is the difference between that and the convention? And I think the reason why the committee did do that for many years is because obviously if states were undertaking intercountry adoptions, the committee considered that it was better for them to do that within a framework, a legal framework, and so it encouraged it. I would say the committee's position has come more to a very neutral one on this, that the committee is not encouraging states to undertake intercountry adoptions, certainly not. Perhaps it never was. I think it nowadays, in the concluding observations, as Olivier says, frequently says to states parties, you should be undertaking investigations into intercountry adoptions that have happened in the past, and you should be preventing this from happening in the future. And the difference between the two, well, obviously the Hague Convention goes into an awful lot more detail. Some people say, well, the principle of subsidiarity, which is that local adoptions should always be considered before intercountry adoptions, is a difference between the two. But actually, I think the subsidiarity principle is embedded into the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Can I, whilst I have the floor, also just respond to what I've heard? Because it's been so interesting hearing all the different perspectives and the different action that has been taken. And I was particularly struck when Peter and Bunyang were talking about the fact that, it triggered my thoughts when I heard that they had asked Denmark to carry out an investigation, and that Denmark had refused to do so because it will cost too much money or take too much effort. Now, that is interesting because Denmark has ratified the Committee on the Rights of the Child's optional protocol on a communications procedure. Korea hasn't. But that would open the door to a consideration of whether or not it would be worth bringing either an inquiry request or an individual communication on behalf of a group of individuals. It's not just one at a time. You can bring it on behalf of the group to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. The advantage that you have of already having asked Denmark and Denmark already having said no is that you have exhausted domestic remedies. In other words, you have, one of the admissibility requirements is that you have to do that. So that is interesting. I should just say, though, that before deciding to bring it to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, it's also important to think about, is that the best committee to bring it to? Because you also have the Human Rights Committee, the Committee on Enforced Disappearances may be able to do something with this as well. So you'd have to look at all of them, because the problem about the Children's Rights Committee is that the people bringing the cases are obviously no longer children. And as we said at the beginning, in a sense, this is a children's right, but it's human right. So it's like, I'm not saying that I think it's not the right committee to bring it to, but I think it is one of the factors to consider when deciding where are you, is it easier to go to a committee that doesn't also have that complexity around a children's rights convention? However, I think there are many ways of arguing it. As Olivia has said, something like the right to identity, and when you still don't have your identity, means you are still undergoing that rights violation that began because of decisions that were taken when you were a child. I think it would all have to be very carefully thought through, but I certainly, my brain started going down that avenue, and I just wanted to share that with you.
I'm very glad your brain went down that avenue, and thank you very much indeed for the journey. I think there were two little questions that I was supposed to respond to. The first being whether intercountry adoption or residential care should be the last resort in child protection. And I'm going to say, first of all, that any child protection system that is based on last resort is not a child rights-based system. We're looking for the best solution for every child, not a solution that we'll have to do. So that's the first thing. That means that we'd be looking at whether or not residential care or intercountry adoption, or adoption in general, would be the best solution for an individual child. There's no way that we can say that intercountry adoption is always better than residential care, or the reverse. It will depend on inter alia what the child actually thinks, if the child is of an age to be able to express an opinion. And it's more and more the case that the child is of an age to express an opinion in current circumstances. So that's the first thing to say. And why was adoption excluded from the guidelines on alternative care? It's a very valid question, in as much as adoption is given as one form of alternative care or seems to be given as one form of alternative care in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 20, with the other forms of foster care and residential care. But it was decided to exclude adoption for two reasons. One being precisely that it is the subject of international standards in the Hague Convention, notably, but also, and in particular, because the regime of adoption is very different from that of alternative care as such. In particular, for example, in alternative care, you're looking at placement review on a regular basis to determine whether the placement is still suitable or not for the child in question. And obviously that does not happen once an adoption order is made. So the guidelines go up to the making of the adoption order, until, in other words, until the parents actually receive or take physical care of the child. and no further. They're two very different outlooks, I think. Alternative care is, moreover, intended where possible to be as short and a temporary measure as possible, in order primarily to ensure the return of the child to his or her family, whereas adoption is conceived as being a long-term response to a child. We can discuss that for a long time, but that would be my response on that. Mia.
Thanks for that, Nigel. And question also for Joelle from Emily about the Swiss dilemmas.
The what?
Yeah, the Swiss dilemmas.
The Swiss dilemmas.
The ongoing challenges within the system. I'm hoping I'm understanding the question right. So I think when our government announced its intention to stop, the main reason that was cited is that, based on the experts group report, is that no matter what reform you do, how strict you are with the adoption laws, you cannot have a system in place that gives you the absolute guarantee that you can exclude abuses, because it happens. A lot of it, most of it, happens in another country, where obviously it's another country. You cannot go and just verify everything. So it's trust based. And so this, together with the fact that we have a very limited number of adoptions, and therefore, is it worth it also going into a huge reform? And can we even offer the type of services to allow for proper adoption and post-adoption services? So all of that led to the proposal to stop. And the ongoing challenges we have in Switzerland that were in the report. One is very specific, our federal system, where we have way too many actors involved, competencies between the federal, state, the local level. And this, combined with the fact that we have so few adoptions, intercountry adoptions left, is a real issue. The fact that we have so few intercountry adoptions, even though we do not have restrictions in place at the moment, also shows a real, how can I say it, a lack of interest somehow of adoptive parents for the type of profiles that are available for intercountry adoptions nowadays. We know there's a lot of people are going through to surrogacy, or just doing other just medical techniques, etc. And we see every time a country changes the type of children profile available, moving from relatively young, healthy children to older children or children with special needs, then suddenly the interest decreases. And it's not just interest, because you need to be really able and ready to adopt these kind of children. It is a child adoption measure, child protection measure in the true sense. And so. And again, we were being asked, or the experts group was being asked to look at how can we be stricter, what can we improve, and there's only so much we can do from our side. I mean, the way we receive the files, we can look at incoherencies, etc., but we cannot impose on country of origins to give us DNA tests, to give us full reports, to do this and that. I mean, we could try, but it seems difficult to attain that. So that's all all that led to this, in principle, proposal to stop, that is directly related to still all the ongoing challenges. So hopefully this answers the question.
Thanks for that, Joelle. I think we have 5 minutes left. We have 5 speakers. I'm going to give everybody one last minute just to make a final comment on what, if you had one thing that a state should do to prioritize to respond to past illicit intercountry adoptions, what would it be? And I'm giving the floor first to Olivier Anne, just because he has to fly, but then over to you, Anne. Olivier?
Sorry, Maya, again in interruptions. Could you just repeat?
Okay. If you could make one recommendation to states on what they should prioritize to respond to past illicit intercountry adoptions, what would it be?
That's really assistance to adoptees and for other states to biological family. I think that's the most urgent thing, that they need to recover their true identity and reestablish their family links.
Thanks for that, Olivier. Thanks for joining us. And Anne, what would yours be?
I would say, obviously, in addition to what's been said already, it's very important to have openness and truth-telling, because from there, the rest of it can flow. But whilst the state is still trying to keep secrets, still trying to cover up, you don't get very far with everything else that you're going to be asking for and would have to do.
And then Peter and Bunyan? Oh, I think it was Linnell
I would
first.
definitely say access to information, that we know the truth about ourselves.
Thank you. And Bunyan?
Well, to say something else, then I would say the holding those who did this responsible. That has turned out to be very, very difficult in Korea so far. So that's some of the things that we're looking at right now.
Thank you. And Linnell?
Yeah, I'm bringing up a new topic, I guess, that nobody's really discussed, but which remains a massive issue in our community, and that is to stop the private proxy, private independent adoptions that the Hague Convention system fails to look after. It's very frustrating for me to sit in Hague meetings time after time where you constantly hear from states saying, no, we're not covering those types of adoptions. So for all of those victims, which is a good majority of those prior to the Hague Convention even coming into being, we still have no governments running investigations that include our adoptions, and we still have no truth-seeking, nothing. So that remains a huge problem. And I also raised the issue that your private proxy independent adoptions are actually on the increase. If you look at adoption statistics today, the Hague adoptions are actually on the decrease because there's so much regulation. But in fact, the private ones are actually on the increase. And immigration is usually your only pathway in the country that the child's arriving into that has any kind of visibility to these, and they are not usually the central authority. So, it begs the question, what are we doing when we're only stopping certain types of adoptions and looking at certain types of adoptions in our investigations, but when we're missing the other huge part that was the huge part that began the whole problem in the first place? Thanks.
Thanks, Linnell. And Joelle, for you.
Everything's been said, but I would also go with the priority being the support for individuals in searching their documents, searching their families if they so wish.
Excellent. And then Nigel, I'll give you the floor to finish the webinar and the final word from you.
Well, indeed, yeah. My thoughts all along have been that we need to, if adoption is going to continue, or if intercountry adoption is going to continue, then we need to really ensure that if it is to continue as a child protection measure, we need to ensure that the carers, the potential carers, are not the ones who are paying to care, because obviously the infusion of money into this process is the thing that has completely transformed it from or prevents it from being, let's say, a true child protection measure. It's the only one that is that requires the carers to pay, and it cannot be logical to have a child protection measure that is based on that kind of regime. So that's my hope that as states continue their efforts being hopefully continued to be kicked forward by such as ICAV and our friends Peter and Bumyong to take up their responsibilities. I hope that they will bear that in mind as well as they approach intercountry adoption in the future. Is that it? I guess it is. Thanks so much to the speakers, to all of you for an extraordinarily rich seminar that webinar that I would find it difficult to take on board unless I listen to it again, which I think I will do. It was extraordinary. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the participants, those who posed questions, those who were with us for until the end. It's great to know that there is interest and concern about intercountry adoption, and particularly the illicit acts that have taken place within the realm of intercountry adoption. And I hope that you'll also join us in a week's time when the second of the series will be looking at how states are preventing abuses in intercountry adoption today. And that will be under the chairmanship or chairwomanship of our colleague Maud Bukikyo. And I wish you until then an excellent 7 days, and see you then. Thank you very much.